So in this video, we're going to look at how to create and use a user-defined procedure. So if you want to follow along, you can download the procedure example AIA file. And what we have set up here is we have a text box to get input from the user. We have a result label with this gray background that's going to show our output. And then we have two buttons, one for check number. After we type something in the input box, we're going to click check number to have it check and make sure that it is a number. And then we're going to create the code for resetting the screen back to a starting position. So we have empty text in the text box, and we're going to clear out the label. So right now, the way the program works is we can type in a number here, and if we type something that's not a number and we check, we get an error message that pops up in our result label with the red background. And if we type something in that is a valid number and we click check number, then we have number is valid and a green background. So let's go in and look at the code of what we have set up so far. So we have a variable called number input, and we're starting it at a 0 value. And then when the screen initializes, we're setting the result label text to an empty string. We are setting the text field or the text box to whatever the value is of our variable number input. So when this program starts, it's 0, so global number input is 0, and that gets put into the text label. And we're setting the result label background color to that light gray shade. So that's what's happening with the app when the screen loads. Let me show you over here. Let me toggle this and resend it back. So here's what the screen looks like when the screen initialize happens. So we have a 0 up here, the label is empty, and this is all clear. So back here in the code, when we click the number check button, we're setting our variable to whatever is in the text box. And then we check to see if it is a number. So if the value of our variable is a number, then we're going to set the result label to text that says number is valid and change the background color. And then if it's not a valid number, right, it's not a number, then our label text is going to say you must enter a number and change the background color to red. So that all worked fine and well. As you saw, we type in a letter, check number, we get the red with the error message, and we change it to a valid number and check it, we get the green message. And now we want to set up the reset button so that it will return this back to the way it looked when it started. In other words, nothing in the text box except the 0. And we want to return this back to a gray background with no text in there. So if we come back here and look, a lot of this is already done with the screen initialize, right? We're setting the text label, we are getting the variable and setting it back and changing the background of the result label. So we can come into the reset button and create a button click event. So when the reset button is clicked, we really wanted to do these same things. So let me just duplicate this whole block so I can grab all of these things together and pull them up here. And then I'm just going to ditch this one. Because the reset button, when you think about it, is doing pretty much the same thing as our initialize. So let's test it out and see how that works. So if I come in here, and hit reset. This changes back to gray, but this didn't change back to 0. So let's try something else just for testing purposes. Let me try some other number, check number, number's valid, and reset. And this works, but this doesn't. So something's going on here with this. Let's come back to the code and check it out. So the label text is getting emptied out, so I'm back to an empty string, and the result label background color is changing, but this part isn't working, right? And if this is where we're saying take the text box and put the value of number input in there. Well, you know what? We didn't try a letter. What happens if we come in here and we put in a letter? Does that make any difference? So we'll put in, you know, a letter or two, and we'll check it. We get our error message. We hit reset. This works, but again, this still doesn't work. So it's not between letters and numbers. What's happening is when you click the check number button, we're taking the value of what's in that text box and putting it into the variable. So that variable has the value of either letters or numbers, whatever you typed in, and it stays in memory until we clear it out. So I think what we need to do in the reset button here is to reset the variable. So we'll use a set to change the value of the variable to, and let's just change it back to 0. So I'll grab a 0 block and snap it in. So now let's see if that works. So we'll do reset, and now this works. So we can put in a number, check it, it's valid, reset. Put in some letters, check number, and reset. Okay. So now that we have that working, and as we started out with this to deal with a procedure, right, now that we have this working, we can create a procedure that would work for the screen initialize as well as the button click. And so here's how we go about doing that, right? A procedure in the built-in blocks, these purple blocks are procedures. So I'm going to grab this first one, which is a to-do procedure. And a procedure allows us to create our own block of code that's not connected to a button click or an initialize or any other event type of block. So we could call this to do something. So I'm going to, instead of calling it procedure, let's call it screen setup. And I'm going to grab all of this code that works for the reset button and snap it in here. And then I'm going to get rid of all of the code under the screen initialize. I'm just going to drag it down here for right now, just in case something is wrong and I need to use it. I don't want to dump it yet. So I want to use this screen setup procedure for both my initialize and my reset button. So now that I have the code block here that has everything that I want it to do, then I can come back over to the procedures block and grab this screen setup. So this created a block that allows me to call this procedure. Calling means, okay, run it. So when it comes into this block, this call block, screen initialize says, okay, call screen setup, jump over here, do this, and then when you're done, come back, and if there's anything else that came after this, it would continue running them. I want it to do the same thing when the reset button is clicked. So I can either come over here to the procedures and grab this, or I can also right click and duplicate here. So now let's test it and see if the screen initialize and the reset button will both work. So to trigger the screen initialize, I'm just going to come back to my screen 1 properties, and I'm going to toggle show status bar back on. Come here to my screen, right? And everything looks okay here for the screen initialize. And so now let's put a number in. Make sure everything still works correctly. So we have a valid number. Now we'll test reset, and reset works fine. So now let's put in letters and check it. All right, we get our message and reset, and it comes back in. So back in our code blocks here, again, to reinforce the idea of the procedure, we have one place that can be reused over and over again. So anytime we want to repeat this set of blocks, we can create a procedure, and anytime we need to use it, we simply use a call block. And so that's an example of a basic do procedure.